Hello, Dave. A huge welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting.
I'm so glad that we're here having this conversation. Um, as we were just saying, the show very much is for change workers, in short. So this topic we're talking about in terms of change is especially relevant to our audience who, one way or another, they may not call themselves change workers, but they are often the coaches, the guides, the therapists that really could be boiled down to saying they're helping people with change to change. And then, of course, as humans, they're also going to be experiencing changes in their own lives and their own work. So, this is a particularly relevant topic to our listeners, which is, of course, wonderful. And I'd like to start with just understanding what's drawn you to this topic of change and understanding that I think you named it like perfect timing around change. What called you to this?
Um, I would say the origin of the book about this, which is called Ready, How to Know When to Go and When to Stay, or How to Make Any Decision in Life, um, came from my realization that when I work with people in therapy, I have to keep in mind their readiness to make a particular change. And the British child psychiatrist D.W. Winnicott, he said, hurry or delay are interferences. So you can't hurry yourself when your whole body, mind, soul, heart is not ready for what comes next.
Mm,
And you also can't delay it. If you delay it, the opportunity for a change may pass you by. Although it can happen that the universe will step in and just push you into the next phase, as happened to Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz when the tornado picked her up and threw her into her next chapter.
mm.
So sometimes it happens like that, and other times it could just, as I say, just lose the opportunity. But I realize that timing is not really in our hands. It's something that simply happens, this readiness. And that was so fascinating to me, that mystery.
Mm.
That's what led me to work on the book.
Oh, I love that. I really do. So, what do you see are the ingredients, if that um makes sense as a word? What do you see as the ingredients around that kind of like what makes that timing? You're saying we don't choose it, we don't control the timing. What are the ingredients that create the timing?
That's the elements of mystery. It just seems like your body mind has a knowledge about what you're ready for
Mm.
that you just can't control or even fully understand. Um, um, Virginia Woolf, in her notes on her novel called The Waves, she says, there are waves by which a life is marked, a rounding off that has nothing to do with events. So let me just repeat that. There are waves by which a life is marked, a rounding off which has nothing to do with events. So, for instance, you could be standing and saying, I do at your wedding when your whole body mind wants a longer time alone.
Mm.
So it's so important to check in with yourself to find out, am I really ready to do this, or am I going along with society's milestones that tell me what I'm supposed to be doing at this particular age. So
Mm.
ultimately, this whole idea of timing has a lot to do with your personal choice. Like, am I free enough and brave enough to obey my body mind rather than what society is telling me I'm ready to do or ready for? And of course, the worst
Mm.
kind of therapist or coach would be one who tries to push you into something that for which the time has not yet come.
Mm.
Now, Shakespeare also says uh, a man uh, a man must endure his going hence, even as his coming hither. The readiness is all. So, in
Mm.
other words, it's supposed to be okay with us to bring something in, and it has to be equally okay to let something go. And the only question is, are you ready for this? Am I ready to let go of a relationship that isn't working? Am I ready to make a commitment to a relationship that is working? Or am I ready to make a commitment to work out conflicts in a relationship that I do want to preserve? You don't just make these decisions on the basis of this is what the self help movement tells you to do.
Mm.
You have
Or
to,
seems even a good idea
yeah,
or
you have to
logical.
check in.
Mm.
How do
Mm.
I check in? Well, it'll be a combination of what am I really feeling here? What are the needs that I have to pay attention to now? What will activate the part of me that really wants to um, move on to that really wants to stay on this journey rather than be afraid and hang back. Your therapist or coach can help you on that level, but needs to be very polite towards you about when you're ready to do it. And we've
Mm.
all had this experience. You just can't do something, and then one morning you wake up and say, "I think I'm ready to do it."
Yes,
And
there's just
nobody
like
can
an
explain,
opening.
well, why were you
Mm.
ready on Tuesday, but you weren't ready on Monday?
Mm.
There really is no pat answer.
No, sometimes it seems as though um life kind of like opens up, but it seems to me that happens at the time that something opens up internally. It's like sometimes it's like, just as I'm ready to, there's a really beautiful Terence McKenna quote where he talks about hurling yourself into the abyss, and then you find there's a feather bed. And it's like at that moment you're ready to do the hurl into the abyss, the feather bed is also appearing. But I don't think you can make either happen. In fact, I was just recalling, I was having a conversation with my daughter at the weekend. She was asking me about making one of the biggest changes of my life, which is probably the case for many people who go from a life of employment into outside of that, working for themselves in some way or other, which for me happened it's 10, 11 years ago. And she asked me, like, what was the reason you did that? And at the time, there was a kind of logical reason that it was kind of like, this is the right time, but it wasn't really logical. It was that actually I'd been moving towards that, like for a number of years prior to that, feeling this sense of at one point I will be ready to leave. But it wasn't the time. It wasn't the time. And just as I was ready, it kind of like the circumstances were perfect for me to do so. And I was just having that conversation with her at the weekend and realizing like, it was like that sense of me being ready was finally there. It hadn't been until that moment.
What a beautiful example. So it was kind of incubating in you,
Mm.
And you did pick up on that. You did pick up on the fact that it was in motion, but you also knew that the time was not right yet.
Which was less, again, logic. There were some logical reasons why it wasn't perfect, but it was really an internal sense of it's not yet, it's not yet. And then, as I say, it kind of felt like the two things happened together. My readiness, just as it was like a perfect opening for me to leave in a way that was really helpful for me to kind of like branch off on my own. Um, and I often see that's the case, that it's kind of like there has to be that internal readiness. Like that, I think it was the Virginia Woolf quote said, like the external events on their own won't create the readiness, but
No,
sometimes the events match the internal readiness.
occasionally, yeah,
Mm,
yes. Well, even
yeah.
it could even be often. But I love your phrase, not yet. Can I tune into the not yet that's appropriate to my life right now
Mm,
rather than the time has come?
mm,
So I'm moving from not yet to the time has come. And then, of course, if you don't make your move, it's the time has passed. So we're continually um, in one of those states.
mm,
For instance, right this minute, both of us, we're both professional people, and the listeners are professional people also, and I'm sure. Um, we don't know what's next in our profession. We don't know what's next in our calling, but it might have started to incubate and reveal itself, and we just aren't aware of it yet. But we might be aware of it in the next few months or a year. And it's just a wonderful, mysterious fact about us as humans that um, we have to obey the timing.
mm. That word obey,
We
that's a
can't
really
push,
interesting word. Mm,
yeah, we can't push it away. We can't force it. Um, and we're also not we're not so well trained in true freedom. We're
mm,
used to obeying more than we are to um, take action on our own, freely make a choice. But the more aware you are of your timing, the more likely you are to be careful about the voices that are trying to make you do something that isn't really right for you or
or
stop you
stop
from
you
doing
doing something.
something.
Yes.
Yeah. So it goes either way.
Mm. There's a
It
real
changes our whole work as therapists and coaches when you bring in this element of combination of mystery and respect for the timing of the client.
mm. I really love this conversation. I absolutely do, because I think we can be kind of like in one extreme or the other, I think, as sort of humans in this modern culture. One is that kind of being directed by outside conditioning that says, like the marriage example, like I should be doing this now, I should be ready now. Or I think those of us that have had a taste of, different kinds of work around individuation and really having a kind of sense of how our real ability to choose, can be at the other end and almost feel like, okay, I should be able to do anything at any time. I've got complete control. Whereas the reality is very much kind of like beyond either of those extremes, to where you're talking about, where it's like this really subtle kind of co-creative experience where there is this sense of like something is unfolding that is beyond my control, or even my knowing, except by that moment when I do know.
Mm. And when that moment comes, when you do know, nobody can convince you otherwise.
Mm,
Nobody can logically show you, oh, you shouldn't be doing this,
mm,
because you know at such a deep level, and I love your word subtle, and in so many subtle ways that the time has come. You
mm,
know, another feature of this is sometimes we think we're hearing reveille, wake up, time to make the move, when we're really hearing taps, end of it. That's another part of this whole um complex feature of our humanity. Like, do I think something is at the beginning when it's really at the end, or vice versa? Because you could think that, oh, this relationship that's just begun for me has so much promise, and I just know it's going to work out, and this is so exciting, and actually, it's not going to last at all. In
mm,
other words, we misread sometimes because we haven't been trained in how do you check in on your timing. See what I mean?
mm.
I'm going to take a quick look at my book and see if I have something on, some specific ways that you do this. But
I
what
share
did
an
you have another question?
example that just, yeah, there's an example that's just come to mind. I was in a conversation with a client earlier, and without going into too many details,
Uh
and
huh.
this I think is an example that actually, is way beyond this particular person. This is, many of us in many different situations. She thought, as you're saying, that she was at the beginning of a relationship, that she was ready to step into the relationship. Actually, it was the end of a cycle of a particular pattern of creating relationships of that kind. And so the relationship was very short because it was actually the what she was feeling. She was actually ready to move beyond that pattern of
Mm-hmm.
behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really was an end, even though it seemed like it was a beginning.
Gee, that's such a good example. Yeah,
It
that
just
is
happened to
what I
be
mean.
a conversation I had today.
Yeah. Now, let me take a quick look here. I have something in, like, um, I'm on page 150 for anybody who has the book ready. And I'm on here, I'm on the topic of how to honor the time to go. So, um, for one way for it to happen is you've been denying you've been denying the importance of making a move, and something happens and you can no longer deny it. So
Mm,
that alerts you to the timing. Occasionally, we disregard timing and just do it. For instance, we act as if we were ready to ask for a raise at work, even though we doubt ourselves or fear a negative reply. But the monkey of timing has bowed humbly to the lion of pluck.
mm,
In other words, yeah, it was important to be kind of cheeky. Also, the attitude of yes to what comes next, even to have that as kind of a daily affirmation. I open myself to what needs to happen for me today. I say yes to the opportunities that come my way. I say yes to letting go and yes to moving on.
mm.
That also helps. Sometimes hitting bottom is the opportune time where it's revealed. You know,
Very much
I
so.
can't go
Dark
down
night of
any
the
further,
soul.
so
Yes.
time to start going back up.
Hmm.
Our body knows the time is right before our mind joins in. The reverse is also true. Sometimes the mind knows readiness long before the body does. So we can't choose one of those over the other.
Very true.
Someone else might defy our timing and nudge us to make a move. A kindly physical education teacher who trusts our skill level more than we do encourages us to go out for the team, even though we don't believe that we're really ready. So sometimes somebody else knows your readiness
Mm.
more than you do. It's not
Yes.
always your own intuition.
Mm.
You know,
Which is that.
your coach, your coach in sports says, yes, you are ready to be on the team. When you think, oh no, I don't think I am.
But this
But once
raises a
you
really,
try it,
yes,
go
absolutely. And I
ahead.
think we've all experienced that. But this raises an interesting question because, again, for those of us that are coaches, therapists, guides of all kinds, sometimes that is our role. But then sometimes we may actually be, I guess, projecting our own sense of readiness on the client, and actually they're not ready. So this is a really interesting one, isn't it, to kind of recognize that sometimes we do have that kind of intuitive sense of readiness of our client, just like in the physical education coach example. But
Yes.
many times I think there can be, as you said earlier, and as an example, this kind of like, you are ready, go do it, when actually the client isn't. So as someone who is here to work with others in that way, what's your process of kind of recognizing when you are meant to play that role, of like seeing that when your client isn't yet, versus actually they aren't ready and you might be pushing them before they are?
The easiest way to tell is if you're recommending something based on what you would recommend to anyone, that's probably off kilter.
Mm,
If you're basing it on your deep knowledge of this individual, then that suggestion, recommendation uh, is a good way to go.
I
So
love that.
let's use a simple example. If you believe, because sometimes we're smugglers of middle class values into clients, and we
Hmm.
don't want to do that. If you believe as soon as someone finishes university, he or she or they should get a job, that's a middle class thought.
Hmm.
Not that it's wrong, but if that's what we're carrying around, and we say that to every one of our clients who's graduating, then I wouldn't trust it. I would only
Mm.
trust. It feels to me like you are ready for a job, or of course, with a lot of inquiry uh, with the client himself or herself or themselves. Um, how does it feel to you? Does it seem as if you want to take a break now, or you want to go into a job?
Hmm.
So, or simplest way to put it is, if it's general, everybody should do this, it's probably not going to work for the client. If it's, let's find out what you personally and uniquely are ready for, that's when you can trust it.
I love that
Does
so
this sound
much.
right to you?
It absolutely does. And I was thinking how in I've had examples where my clients have, either prior to coming to work with us, or they've been a client and then for whatever reason have kind of moved on, but then told me kind of what they're experiencing. And I think this happens particularly with like forms of like business coaching, primarily, but I don't think it's only that, where there is this sense of like a general way that you ought to do business, a general way that you ought to market, or a general way that you ought to price. And I think when it's applied in the way that you're saying, it really does miss that readiness of the individual. So I think this shows up in many forms of coaching, but I think particularly with that, where there's almost like a formula, therefore everyone should fit the formula,
Mm. Yeah, formula, that's a
which
good
of course
word.
they don't.
Yes, this could be the
Mm,
opposite of a formula. This would
yes.
be respect of the uniqueness.
Mm, yeah,
And
that
one of the ways
really
that
makes
this,
sense.
um, I didn't mean to interrupt. Were you going to say something
No, no,
else?
no, I was agreeing with you. That really feels exactly right.
One of the areas we haven't talked about, which I find very fascinating, is your calling in life.
Mm,
That is certainly something that you would need to check in with yourself about. Like, what is my vocation? What is my purpose on the planet? If I say to myself, uh, I'll have to find out what my calling is by um, by checking with other people, even though that would be useful, like, um, how do I look to you? Does it seem as if I'm the kind of person who wants to be helping others as part of my calling? Or does it seem as if I have a different kind of a calling? Like, for instance, am I called to be an artist? Um, am I called to be in the workforce? Um, all of those kind of questions you could check in with other people, but the best way to find out is to look into yourself and to make contact with a higher power than your own ego. So the decision can't be made on the basis of what will bring in the most money. It would be more like, what were the gifts I was given that I now want to put to use?
mm. Yes, absolutely. This speaks so deeply to my heart. Like much of the work we do is very much that, really helping people to discover their calling, but also to actualize it. And that way of approaching it, that like deep inquiry, and recognize, this is where we're getting into words like, destiny and fate and purpose. But so much of this, going back to your word earlier, the mystery is held in the mystery. This isn't something that we can just work out with our minds, or just by, as you say, asking others. It's a in some ways, I would say, the kind of deepest inquiry of our lives. And I'd say certainly for those of us called to be change workers, it really is a calling. It really is a calling.
Yes.
Um, and there's, again, this, talking about myself and Jonathan, co-founder of Waking the Wild, people often will want us to tell them, like, because they know that we've done this work for a time now and seen lots of people, they'll be asking us, like you're saying, what is it I'm here to do? And we know by now, whilst even we can see certain, patterns of things that often mean that someone's, adept at something, really the work is to give them that kind of like the breadcrumbs into that deeper inquiry for themselves, coming right the way back to where we started. This is something that someone can only find within. These are like
Mm.
deep knowings about meaning and timing that can only be felt, really, especially these big questions of calling. This is something that we know when we know.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said earlier, there's a point where it's undeniable.
Yes, and we can't be talked out of it.
Mm, yes, even if it's unconvenient, we can be talked, I think, potentially talked out of acting on it, but we can't be talked out of the knowing.
Right. Yeah, something inside really knows. And um, sometimes the knowing is related to synchronicity, which is the
Mm,
mysterious, meaningful coincidences that happen in life that point you to your calling. And one of my books is called The Power of Coincidence. It's about this topic that Jung helped us see, that you want to listen to those mysterious coincidences and find out what they're telling you about what's next for you or what your calling is. And
mm,
this and synchronicity is the archetype, the deep uh, connection to grace. Grace is the mysterious gift that comes to us unearned, unmerited, even without even our having to ask for it. Um, we just suddenly feel a power and readiness to take a certain action, and or we suddenly have an insight that is so important, and we realize I didn't have this courage on my own. I didn't have this wisdom on my own. It just came to me from universe, God, higher power, whoever you want to put it, something beyond your ego. That also figures into this topic of readiness. So you
mm.
see how it has a spiritual dimension to it. It's not only psychological,
Absolutely.
it's also the spiritual, in my mind, refers to the more than. So there's some, when we look at nature, there's more than what we are more going on there than what we actually see.
Mm-hmm.
And with this topic, there's something more that speaks to me than my logical mind.
Yes.
There's an intuitive sense that has a wisdom all its own. And sometimes nature, time in nature, is a wonderful way to make contact with it. Um, One of our American poets, Wallace Stevens, says, "Perhaps the truth depends upon a walk around the lake." In other words, you
Oh,
find out something by walking around the lake
oh
that
my
you would never
goodness.
have realized logically.
I love that. So I've never heard that quote. Is
Yeah,
it part of a poem?
yes, part of a poem.
Yes. Oh, that's gorgeous. I mean, the very reason we're called Waking the Wild is that very like the way the outer wildness can kind of bring us back to our inner wildness, what we could say is our soul, our
Yeah.
kind of connection to everything. I love that so much. The I love the way you're kind of like unashamedly really pointing in the direction of the spiritual. As in order to even have this conversation in a way that really honors like everything that's at play, we can't do that without, again, whatever word we want to use, whether it's spirit, whether it's God, it's like none of this really can make sense without recognizing there's all of that this is being held within. And
Mm.
that I love how you spoke about grace, and like so much of this is being revealed in those moments, in the synchronicities, in the insights, in those kind of like just sudden opportunities. And to kind of, it feels quite sad almost, doesn't it, to think that we are in control of it all and not blessed with grace.
Well, it's quite arrogant
Yes.
and a big mistake.
Arrogant and wrong. What a combo.
Yes. Well, I'd like to mention something regarding the spiritual, and this is an interesting coincidence.
Mm,
Okay. Because behind you is a statue of the Virgin Mary, Our Lady
mhm.
of Guadalupe,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
And I have the same statue in my closet right behind me. that you
goodness.
have.
Is
So
that,
we're having this
is
whole
that, I can see it
conversation.
there.
Yeah, we're having
Oh
this
my
whole conversation,
gosh.
shall we say, within under the mantle of the great mother goddess, the great earth mother.
Oh,
And that has such a spiritual feeling to it.
it does. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. I'm so glad you saw that and then
Yeah.
recognized the, oh, that's just
I'll show
gorgeous.
you.
Yes. Oh, oh my goodness. I love that. There's just,
Yeah, it's the same one you have.
yes. And it's only very recently that that's been in view of anyone that I'm talking to. Like literally, it's only been there for, I've had it for longer, but it's only been visible for about 2 weeks.
It's
I
just
love
such an
that so
interesting
much.
coincidence, isn't it?
It really is. It
And it
really is.
places our whole conversation like in the presence of the great earth mother
It does.
who has been worshipped on this planet from the beginning.
Mm.
And Mary is her most recent way of appearing.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, um,
I,
we
I
still have
feel,
time, right?
yes, we still have time. I was feeling just so moved by the grace of that moment that I was just really kind of enjoying sitting in the feeling of that. But I'm really glad, because I think at the beginning of the conversation I was like perhaps waiting to see how you felt and would express what I see is like, we can't have conversations of these kind without some sense of something beyond us, the divine. And I didn't kind of want to impose my sense of that on you. And I just love the way that it's just like not just kind of like presence itself, but presence itself in such a distinct way.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I appreciate that too.
Hmm. So coming to that, what's your, for me, this is again, it only all makes sense from within that context of recognizing kind of our place in the world of things. Um, do you find that people who you work with, people who read your books, do you find there's sometimes resistance to that sense? You know, again, so many of us are kind of bereft of a connection to something greater than ourselves. Do you notice that there is sometimes like resistance to that idea with the people that you work with?
Yes, and that's where um, I would want to be very respectful because we don't ever want to impose our view or orientation spiritually on someone else. We always want to be respectful of the pluralistic society that we live in, and we want to um, just be accessible and available if somebody wants to walk into this dimension with us, but we can't drag anybody into it.
Mhm.
You mean the spiritual dimension, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
Hmm.
Because I think it's a rare person who doesn't have some sense of um, the transcendent, being the more than
Mm.
what we see, the more than what we know, the more than what nature looks like. Um, the simplest example I have, which is a little bit off our topic, but just take a minute to share. Um, for instance, a person could say, well, I don't have any spirituality. But if spirituality, bottom line, is the realization that there's something more going on than meets the eye, um, I would say uh, a good example of that is a keepsake. For instance, um, if there's something that you have that you've held on to, it's a thimble that belonged to your grandmother. Let's use that as an example. And you cherish that and you are going to keep it all your life, even though it doesn't have value monetarily. It's meaningful to you because it belonged to your grandmother, and you saw her with the thimble on her finger when she was mending your shirt. Then that symbol is more than just a thimble. And any person who believes that there's something that's more than what it looks like, is already on the spiritual path. This is
Oh, I love that. Yes, that's
what I mean.
gorgeous. Yeah, it
Yeah, I
really
mean, not
makes
that you would
sense.
force somebody to see it that way, but it would be a rare person who doesn't have a keepsake or respects a keepsake.
I would agree, yes. And I think sometimes there's, and sometimes particularly people who perhaps had an upbringing that was religious of some kind, but then have rejected it and then kind of like felt that they also have to reject any sense of the divine
Yeah.
with it. I think these like little like ways to open the doorways back where they can recognize, oh, this already does have a role in my life. I just didn't see it did. I think these things are beautiful because, again, I can't see the way that we can live a life of real meaning, let alone kind of like be able to understand the role of kind of change in our lives without some sense of that connection to God, to spirit, again, wherever way that makes sense to us.
Hmm. Yes, and it makes life so much richer when you have this realization.
Mm,
And
absolutely.
you're right. Religion could, the way religion was presented to us with all its repressive rules, could have turned us off to the spiritual. And so, one of the important, uh, shall we say, goals in life is to recover this spiritual sense, which I believe is in all of us, um, irrespective of how religion might have taken it away from us.
Mm.
So, Jung has a statement, Carl Jung, the purpose of religion is to prevent you from having a religious experience.
Oh.
So you want to recover that, religion, that word religious in Latin means some type of connection,
Ah.
the lig, like ligament,
Mm.
connect
Ah,
something.
yes.
So it's
Mm.
supposed to, reconnect you to the spiritual. That's the purpose of it.
Mm.
But if your religion was full of rules and repressions, it's going to be hard to make contact with that. So that's
Mm.
another one of our, shall we say, tasks in life.
Yes.
Uh, not to give up on our spirituality just because of um, how it was originally presented.
Mm. Yes, absolutely. Mm.
And again, the readiness to do that will take many years. That's another example of readiness.
Mm. I feel like there's my own story is such a good example of this. I'm just going to very briefly share it because it pulls together everything that we've been speaking about in one story, which is I I didn't have a religious background, but it was kind of spiritual in its own way. My father was very much a hippie, so it was kind of like that kind of spirituality and a real connection to nature as well. And I think for many different reasons, kind of closed that down and really tried my best to kind of like make sense of this mainstream mundane world in a kind of like way that in some ways was very devoid of anything spiritual. And that continued until my dad suddenly died, and I was blasted open to a profound experience of spirit. And so it was like both parts of what we've been exploring here, that connection, that like just undeniable connection to something greater than me was just there, present on the day he died. And it was also something I wasn't ready to choose until it was there and it happened.
Mm, what a beautiful story. Thank you.
It just suddenly realized like it's such a wonderful example of everything we've been speaking about. And so
And it
not
shows the
every
power of grief. That
mm,
sometimes grief is the doorway into something altogether wonderful and new for us.
yes. You mentioned it earlier. I was thinking a lot as you were talking earlier about sometimes we have to kind of, I think you said like be at rock bottom. And I was thinking, I've very much seen in the work that we do with people, there very much is that kind of dark night of the soul, that death process that's necessary. But because of our relationship with death in our culture, this kind of like we push it away, we deny it, it also gives this very difficult relationship with change when change often does need us to let go, allow things to die in order for something to be born.
Mm,
And I think the more that we can see that they're kind of like there is this just like grand play taking place, and within it, there has to be all of these deaths and rebirths, just because that's the pattern of things. I think it gives us kind of grace within that too. That's
hmm.
what I'm really seeing is kind of like there's that recognition of like, us receiving grace, but I think it gives us this like ability to be graceful with the unfolding.
Yeah, very much so. It's a beautiful way to put it.
I'm just so I feel very grateful for this conversation and the way that you have brought grace into it. I think it gives this invitation into a kind of like a kind of more reverent experience of
Yes,
change.
yes. And
Mm,
it's available to all of us.
yes, absolutely. So, where can listeners find out more about you and the gorgeous work you do?
So I'm a psychotherapist and author, and the book that we're referring to is called Ready. And to find out about what I do, you can go to my website, which is davericho.com, Davericho, like Rich O, .com, all one word. And there I have my list of books and also some MP3s of talks I gave and some podcasts and some free articles and so forth. So if you go to the website, you can take a look and see if there's anything you are interested in.
Wonderful. And all of that will also be on the show notes, but that's fabulous. Thank you so much, Dave. This has been truly
Well,
wonderful.
I really enjoyed this.
Thank you.